I've
Now,
made that
Dr.
point
Shook,
repeatedly.
from those two premises that nature exists and that there is no bridge to a supernatural reality, do you really think that it follows that nature is all there is?
That is the most reasonable conclusion remaining so far.
By what logical rule of inference does that follow? It seems to me that from those two premises, all that follows is we don't know if there is something beyond nature.
Let me try an analogy. Suppose, to see how my reasoning process works, let me try an analogy. Suppose you have a large sum of money you wish to invest, and I'm a broker, and I'm telling you the stock market's going up and up and up and up and up. And you say to me, well, now look, I'm pretty happy with my bank checking account. My money's really safe. Give me several positive good reasons for investing it in the stock market. And I proceed to give you one after another really weak, in your judgment, argument. And after you get past the third or fourth one, you stop me and you say, no, I'm not going to additionally try to put my money in the stock market. I don't want my money there. You haven't given me enough good reasons.
Okay, now,
the naturalist is somebody who retains
this
belief in
exactly
nature.
Illustrates my point. That person has not given you reasons to believe the stock market is going up. But that doesn't allow you anyway logically to conclude that therefore the stock market isn't going to go up or that it's going to go down. You simply have to withhold judgment.
With regard to the empty tomb, Dr. Craig briefly mentioned at one point that the majority of scholars accept the empty tomb. That's actually not true. I assume this is based on Gary Habermas's article in the Journal of the Study of Historical Jesus in June 2005, where Habermas made the claim that 75% of scholars accept the empty tomb.
I think we got 5 good grounds for affirming the historicity of the empty tomb, and that's why, in fact, most scholars do support it. I didn't quote Gary Habermas as my support for that. I quoted Jakob Kramer, who is an Austrian specialist, and you remember said by far most exegetes support the empty tomb.
He also says that women can't serve as witnesses in a Jewish court of law. That's actually completely false. In my book, Not the Impossible Faith, I conclusively demonstrate that they were in fact widely accepted as witnesses in Jewish courts and in Roman courts and in Greek courts, and that they were even used as sources for historical information.
I suggested thirdly that the women witnesses lend credibility to the empty tomb story, and here Richard says, oh, but women did serve as witnesses in Jewish courts of law. What he's talking about is passages from the Mishnah, which is 200 years after the time of the gospel events. Moreover, when you look at these passages, what you find out that women can serve as witnesses on is only 2 things. They can only serve to witness in court to 2 things. First, they can testify to their virginity when they were married, in case their husband accuses them they weren't a virgin. Secondly, a woman can testify that her husband is dead so that she can prove that she's a widow. That's all they can do. I think that serves to emphasize the point that I'm making, that the testimony of women just wasn't regarded on a par with men's. In any case, what Josephus said probably represented the general prejudice of his time, that women were too lightheaded and brash to serve as credible witnesses. Now, Richard says, but look, Josephus relied on the testimony of women in 2 cases in his work. Yes, precisely because no male witnesses were available. He's talking about the testimony of women who were the only survivors of the slaughters at Gamala and Masada. And this actually goes to prove my point. This is the only place in the corpus of Josephus where he uses women witnesses. And why does he do so here? Because there were no male witnesses. They were the only survivors of the slaughters. The fact that the women are witnesses shows that Josephus isn't making this up, but he is relying on what witnesses he had. And the gospel writers find themselves in exactly the same situation. Third thesis, too, that the resurrection body is identical with what Paul called our inner man, which is growing inside us and will finally come out at the resurrection in an organized form like Casper the ghost. Those are Richard's words.
I never used the words Casper the ghost. I'm assuming that was his commentary on what I have argued.
What logic is saying if the universe has an explanation, it must be God? It's total, for a man of his intelligence, it's totally silly. Now, I just threw these things in. He keeps quoting Alex Vilenkin that this theorem works. Alex Vilenkin, wrote me an email after our first debate saying, you know what? It doesn't work when there's quantum gravity. It's not true. It's not even true in the multiverse. So, but he's so convinced that these arguments must be true, he won't listen to the fact that they're not.
I'd like to see this, again, this private email put up on the screen to see who has misquoted Vilenkin.
Well, I put it up there so he would quote himself. That's better than actually quoting him, I generally find.
Okay, that's it, isn't it?
Okay,
all
is
right.
it up here?
Yeah. Okay, now notice it says, a theorem is only as good as its assumptions. The BGV theorem says that if the universe is on average expanding along a given world line, this world line cannot be extended or cannot be infinite to the past. A possible loophole is that there might be an epoch of contraction prior to the expansion. Models of this sort have been discussed by Aguirre and Grattan and by Carroll and Chen. Now, the thing is, Lawrence, that in the very paper that I quoted from Alex Vilenkin last April, he shows specifically by name that the Aguirre and Grattan model and the Carroll and Chen model don't work. More here, because I noticed that at the end of this paragraph, where the Carroll, Chen, and Aguirre-Grattan models are mentioned, that he specifically shows...
Because it was technical. He talked about the fact that you
Lawrence, hang on a second, just let Bill
He
finish.
specifically shows that these models cannot be past eternal and that they involve, therefore, a beginning of the universe,
Bill,
just like the others.
You can do the math if you want.
Now,
I'd love
wait.
you to do it.
Now, wait. I couldn't help notice, although it's down from the screen now, that there was a series of ellipsis points following the paragraph.
Yeah, because it was technical, and I thought
Well,
it was,
I wonder what you've deleted from the original letter.
I just
No, wait.
I just told you.
No, wait. Yeah, but you
I
didn't.
just told you. He says that you assume a minimum of entropy at the lowest point, for which there's no rationalization in the papers and within the context of the model given, and therefore he finds them unpleasant.
Could it have been something like this? You can evade the theorem by postulating that the universe was contracting prior to some time. This sounds as if there's nothing wrong with having a contraction prior to expansion. But the problem is that a contracting universe is highly unstable. Small perturbations would cause it to develop all sorts of messy singularities so that it would never make it to the expanding phase.
There's
Vilenkin.
a growth.
I was simply saying that this is not a mere matter of speculation, that there's more than a tiny bit of evidence on the table.
But is he saying
Evidence for what?
Evidence for a beginning of the universe.
Yes.
Well, we know that. Nobody
All
disagrees.
right, well, that's what I'm offering in this first argument, is the evidence.
But
Because
why?
there's
Because
a
nobody
beginning
disputes
doesn't
it.
imply a God.
It does if the first premise is true, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. It logically follows
Yeah,
that
but it
therefore...
doesn't. But the cause hasn't got to be God.
Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless,
Yes, I know.
spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't... computers are designed by people. I mean,
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless.
Timeless.
well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it time? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function. It takes
Oh no,
time.
this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent.
Yes, you have to be
Oh
logically
no,
coherent.
this
And
computer
besides-
is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being.
No.
And a computer is a physical...
Not this computer.
object.
Oh
Well, then-
no.
Okay, see, what you're doing is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical, It's just another word if you rob it of all the attributes that make it a computer.
Leaves one broad type of theory left. That is a theory that what the disciples saw was some sort of perceptual illusion. Now, there's only one thing they could have seen that would have made them think they saw Jesus. Could it have been an ET from outer space? Could have been, but that's enormously improbable. How about an apparition? Dr. Craig is right. A ghostly apparition would not be mistaken for the risen Jesus. What about a mere lookalike, someone who kind of looked like Jesus the way some people look like Elvis? No, because here we're dealing with Jesus' family members like James and people who were with Jesus day in and day out. There's only one type of object that could have been mistaken by the disciples for Jesus, and that is a twin, and that is an unknown twin. Now, when Dr. Craig talks about the scars of the crucifixion in the hands of the risen Jesus, is this really a problem for the twin theory? If someone actually is going to fake a resurrection, it's not much of a problem to fake scars. I'm not worried about that at all. The twin theory easily accommodates those facts with a minimum loss of probability.
I was hoping that Greg would not say that Dave used makeup or other means of faking the scars of the crucifixion. To me, this just adds one more implausible ad hoc hypothesis that just reduces the theory to absurdity after a while. What about that implausibility? I said a switch of babies is incredible. I didn't say it was impossible. I said it was incredible. He says, but it does happen today. Yes, it happens today. But did it happen in the historical context of Jesus' birth, where he's born all alone in a stable with just other animals around, or when he's born in a peasant home under the watch care of the family or relatives there? It's not credible in that context. As for the concept of no crucified or rising Messiah, he dropped the point. He also dropped the point about Dave either having a conspiracy or trying to break into the tomb himself. I think it's very clear the theory is implausible. I then showed 8 ways in which it's ad hoc. Now it's 9 given the resurrection scars. He says, but look, I've been forced to this theory by rejecting the other theories. We're led to this by rejecting the others. But we're not led to this if we don't reject the resurrection theory. The only way you're led to this is by thinking that the resurrection is improbable. But there is no basis for saying the hypothesis God raised Jesus from the dead is improbable relative to the background information. In fact, and I want to close on this point, I think this shows the extremity of the lengths to which you have to go in order to deny the resurrection of Jesus. If this is what we're led to by denying the resurrection, then if I were a non-Christian, I would be shaken to the soles of my shoes by this demonstration. Is this what I've got to believe in order to deny the resurrection? So that
the wastefulness, inefficiency, and imperfection of biological evolution are more likely on the assumption that it is a blind causal mechanism with no mind and limited powers than on the assumption that it is the instrument somehow of an all-powerful rational intelligence.
Fourthly, he suggests that evolution is incompatible with the existence of God because evolution is wasteful and inefficient. It's not entirely clear to me that the assumption behind this objection is true, namely that macroevolutionary theory is true. It's far from demonstrated. In fact, it's fantastically improbable that this could have happened in the absence of a designing intelligence. This has been pointed out by Frank Tipler and John Barrow in their book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle. They list 10 steps in the evolution of Homo sapiens, each of which is so improbable that before it would have occurred by chance alone, the sun would have ceased to be a main sequence star and incinerated the Earth. They estimate the evolution of the human genome, the odds of this are somewhere between 4 to the negative 180th power to the 110,000th power, and 4 to the negative 360th power to the 110,000th power. So if evolution did occur, it would literally be a miracle, and therefore evidence for the existence of God.
Now, as for the experiences, the appearances of Jesus, Dr. Craig said that I deny these. I do not. I do not deny that the disciples had an experience which they interpreted, which they took as being an appearance of Jesus. I think they probably did. Well, how do we account for that? How can we say that they could possibly have had such an experience? Well, once again, he far too quickly and dismissively disregards the explanation of hallucinations. I was just simply reading the Encyclopedia of Psychology recently. It says that 1/8 to 2/3 of normal human beings experience waking hallucinations.
It's just an a priori rejection of the miraculous here. There isn't any kind of literary testimony, historical testimony that could convince you.
So once again, these extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence in no way implies a bias against the supernatural. It's simply an application of a rule which we use in our daily lives.
But you're saying that when you say extraordinary, really what you're saying is no amount of evidence would convince me of these extraordinary claims.
Sure it would. If tomorrow morning, immediately after breakfast, suddenly there was an earthquake, you know, and a silvery light shone in the sky and the leaves dropped from the trees. And I dashed outside and there, towering over us like 100 Everest, was this giant figure with lightning playing around his Michelangeloid face. And he pointed down and saying, "Be assured, Keith M. Parsons, that I do in fact exist and I'm sick of your logic chopping." Dr. Craig, I would join you in the pew of the church, in the front pew of the church the next Sunday.
Be going to the question and answer period. We're going to go to the question and answer period, so be going to the microphone as we wind this down.
You don't think that you would have said, "Oh, I was having a hallucination."